Hi G2 and welcome to Small Group this week. My name is Jamie and I want to take you back to 2002. I was just 13 years old and I was obsessed with football. Playing football, watching football, talking about football, playing football video games, and even football summer camp. The whole works. And this was back in the days when football was a bit hard to watch on TV. So for me and my friends, our consumption of football was mostly squeezed into an hour on Saturday night watching Match of the Day. Now imagine my excitement when my cousin Roger said that for my 13th birthday, he would take me to watch Arsenal at Highbury Stadium. Wow, I'll be able to watch all of my heroes in person, uninterrupted. Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, oh my word. This is definitely one of the events in my life I most eagerly anticipated. Now, my birthday was in February and the game wasn't until September. Don't really know why there had to be such a big gap. Clearly my cousin was trying to torture me, but it really did help to build the anticipation. There I was, twiddling my thumbs, waiting and waiting for this match to come around, imagining what it would be like. Would it be better than watching on TV? What would the atmosphere be like? Would I be able to see clearly? Would my heroes even be playing? I hoped that we'd win and score loads of goals. Now we were playing Bolton Wanderers, who are a team that we should beat, so 3-0, 4-0, hoping for the best. Finally, September came around. As we walked from the tube station to the stadium, thousands of people were walking alongside with their Arsenal shirts and scarves and hats, and the smell of burger vendors filling the air. My eyes were wide with excitement and amazement at being part of this atmosphere and walking alongside all of those Arsenal fans. I felt like I was part of something special, even though it was just a game against Bolton Wanderers. Nonetheless, we got to our seats and the game began. My heroes just a stone's throw away. Now, we thought, okay, licking our lips, 3-0, 4-0, but that's not quite how things turned out. We scored a goal in the first half, Thierry Henry, but Bolton got one back. And then the rest of the second half at 1-1, no breakthroughs, no clear-cut chances. And we were desperate for that second goal. And wow, right at the last minute, almost the last kick of the game, in stoppage time, our Nigerian striker Kanu pokes the ball over the line, 2-1, come on you Gunners! Ecstatic, truly an amazing finish to that game. This was an event that I was so excited about, and I actually didn't know what to expect, and the match totally did not turn out the way that we thought it would. Now, I want to pose some questions for discussion now. Can you think of some things that you've eagerly anticipated in your life, something you've been really excited about, but you actually weren't even really sure what it was going to be like or what to expect exactly? Does it make you more excited when you don't really know what's coming? Pause now and discuss in your groups. This week we're looking at Matthew chapter 24 verses 1 to 35. Now it's a really challenging passage, but we have an opportunity today to read it together and try to dig in and figure out what it means. So read it through together as a group and ponder together what stood out, what doesn't really make sense, what do you make of this passage? Over to you. Now, this passage comes in the lead up to Jesus' crucifixion. It is part of a series of Jesus' prophecies recorded in Matthew 24 and 25, as well as Mark 13 and Luke 21, that are collectively known as the Olivet Discourse. Now, this is quite a challenging, complex topic, and we could literally have a whole series of sermons just on these 35 verses. But we're going to try to unpack Jesus' answers to two of his disciples' questions. When will the temple be destroyed? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? It's not possible to cover everything in this video, but I encourage anyone that's interested to read around the subject. It is there's a lot of material out there. There's actually a little bit of context missing from the first verse in Mark 13, which is another retelling of these prophecies. A disciple was marveling at the magnificence of the temple and its stones. And Jesus was kind of like, you know what, don't get too attached to these stones. It's all going to be obliterated. And then he proceeds to give all of his other prophecies. Now, this discourse is a minefield, and there are several schools of thought in how we're meant to interpret what is written. I'm not here to tell you that I'm an expert, but we can look at this passage critically together and be open to what God might have to say to us through his words. While it may seem at first glance that this is a literal map for Jesus' second coming, some of Jesus' prophecies seem to have already come true. Now, it would have been in the future for his audience here, his disciples, but about 35 years later, the Romans invade Jerusalem in the year 70 AD, and the temple is indeed destroyed, just as Jesus predicts. There are also things that have happened and continue to happen that Jesus talks about, like wars, famines, earthquakes, false prophets. Christians have been persecuted and will continue to be persecuted and put to death. And a good chunk of the New Testament records exactly that, persecution of Christians. Now, in verse 30, we read that all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Well, is that coming down from heaven or going up into heaven? Now, in Daniel 7, verse 30, we read a similar phrase in one of Daniel's visions, coming with the clouds of heaven. And in that vision, the Son of Man ascends, goes up to meet the Ancient of Days. And we know from the last chapter of Luke that after Jesus rises from the dead, he later ascends into heaven. So this is seemingly a prophecy of those events. So has this all already happened? Well, one thing we might want to talk about is prophetic foreshadowing. And prophetic foreshadowing is when something like an event or a person points forward, is a sign of things to come. It can mirror what's to come or reflect. One example is how King David in the Old Testament, the life of King David, mirrors and reflects and points forward to the life of Jesus. There are a lot of similarities in how their lives are recorded in the Bible and what their purpose ends up being. In Ezekiel chapter 34, verse 23 to 24, it says, I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. Now, at the time the book of Ezekiel was written, David had been dead for quite a while already. But the verses highlight the fact that the life of King David prepared the way for Jesus to come and was a signpost for the fact that Jesus would be the shepherd that will tend for his people. And Jesus will be the prince. Now, there are many other examples of prophetic foreshadowing, particularly in the Old Testament, pointing forwards to the life of Jesus. If we look at this passage, it seems that yes, a lot of these things have come true. But if we look at this passage in the context of prophetic foreshadowing, then potentially they also cast our eyes forward to the second coming of Jesus. Now, what on earth is the abomination that causes desolation, I hear you ask? Who knows? It seemingly refers to something that pollutes what is holy. Now, this could potentially be referring to the Roman invasion in the year 70 and the destruction of the temple, but it could also foreshadow the Antichrist, described in the book of Revelation and in other books in the New Testament, but we don't really have time to go into that. Another potentially revealing verse is verse 34, which reads, "Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass until all these things have happened." We know from history that this is literally true. A few decades after this prophecy, these things do in fact happen to the generation, as witnessed by the generation that Jesus was talking to here. There is a school of thought that none of these prophecies have come true yet and are all yet to come. In that case, the reference to this generation is taken to refer to the human race, and there are various ways of interpreting other words and phrases in this passage. But personally, I think that's a bit of a stretch. Still, in light of prophetic foreshadowing, we could potentially see this as not just a prophecy of the Roman invasion and subsequent struggles, but maybe also as a message that later on, nobody will be able to escape the judgment that will be brought by Jesus' second coming. And that is one thing that we can know, that Jesus will come again in glory. We live in a world where there is suffering, where most of the things in this passage are already happening and will continue to happen. Wars, natural disasters, persecution. But I think Jesus is laying these things out, not to spread doom and gloom. Instead, I think it's more of a heads up, a warning not to start following the fake news, the deceivers, the false prophets, the idols, and instead to stay true and faithful to Jesus, no matter what's going on around. And whether Jesus is coming up into the clouds or coming down from the clouds, whichever direction, we know that he's going to be doing it in power and great glory, as it says in verse 30. Now, one thing we can draw from this passage is that Jesus' words are true. They literally came to pass as he said they would. He said the temple would be destroyed, and it was. He said that Christians would be persecuted, they were, as documented in the New Testament. And another thing we can draw from this passage is that there will be a struggle for us as Christians, and there will be suffering. But ultimately, Jesus will conquer all in the end. And we can live in eager anticipation for that day, whether it comes in our lifetime or not. A common motif in similar passages in the Bible is that Jesus tells us to be ready. If these passages foreshadow his second coming, what does it mean to be ready? Well, I don't think it necessarily means to get hung up on the little details as though it is a clear-cut map for his second coming, for the end times. And in fact, sometimes when people have become too hung up on the little details, we've ended up with predictions for that the end of the world is coming in the year X because such and such has happened. The mark of the beast is the COVID vaccine. The abomination that causes desolation is Donald Trump. The end is nigh. Well, and of course, none of these predictions have come true. But I think, what does it mean to be ready? I don't know for sure. But perhaps it means loving Jesus, showing love to others, and sharing the gospel. To carry on with our lives and not be so focused on the second coming that we forget to do everything else, that we just ignore everything else. Perhaps it also means to eagerly anticipate the glory to come when he returns. Much like I anticipated my first trip to watch Arsenal at 13 years old. Now, when I went to that match, I didn't know, when I was looking forward to that match, I didn't know exactly what to expect. I didn't know how the match would play out. I didn't know how it would feel. I spent a lot of time imagining what it would be like to watch Arsenal at Highbury. And I think it's healthy for us to imagine what it'll be like when Jesus comes again, even if we don't know exactly what that's going to look like or exactly what's going to happen. There was a struggle in the second half of that football match. And for us as Christians, there is and will be a struggle as we await glory to come. But unlike football, where the end result is never guaranteed, as Christians, we do have a guarantee and a full and certain knowledge that Jesus will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, and his kingdom shall have no end. Now, as we finish, I've got some questions for you to ponder. Feel free to take the discussion in other directions. I've got some questions to get you started, and then pray together in your groups as you finish. Thanks, G2.